I watched my wife scroll through a list of her friends' relationship rules and declare that our marriage was a joke. That was the moment I drew my final line. Separate accounts, closed doors, and the end of whatever we had left. This wasn't one of those small, heated arguments couples bounce back from. The kind where someone says something thoughtless in frustration, apologizes an hour later, and everything returns to normal by morning. No, this was different. This was deliberate, calculated, and devastating in its precision. It started with Miranda slamming her fork down during dinner, the metallic clang echoing through our dining room like a gunshot, and announcing, without any warning or preamble, that she should have listened to her friend's 7 warnings before marrying me. The sound of that fork hitting the plate still haunts me. It wasn't just the noise, it was the finality of it, the way it punctuated the end of something I'd believed was solid. We'd been sitting there in our modest dining room, the same room where we'd celebrated anniversaries, shared dreams, and made plans for a future that suddenly seemed like it had never existed outside my imagination. That room had witnessed so many moments of our life together. Birthdays with homemade cakes, quiet Sunday mornings with coffee and newspapers, late-night conversations about our hopes and fears. Now it was becoming the scene of our unraveling. I remember looking around that room as she spoke, seeing all the small details we'd chosen together. The paint color, a warm beige that Miranda had insisted would make the space feel cozy. The framed photos on the wall showing us at various stages of our relationship, smiling and hopeful. The table itself, a sturdy oak piece we'd found at an estate sale and refinished together one weekend, laughing as we got more stain on ourselves than on the wood. Every object held a memory, and every memory was being poisoned by her words. Apparently, according to her carefully rehearsed declaration, she was stuck, now, trapped in what she proudly labeled a pathetic marriage. She used those exact words, pathetic marriage, with an emphasis that suggested she'd been rehearsing this moment, perhaps in front of her bathroom mirror or during whispered phone calls with those friends she kept mentioning. The way she said it wasn't angry or sad, it was matter of fact, as if she were simply stating an obvious truth that everyone else had seen except me. There was almost a clinical detachment to her tone, as though she were a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis rather than a wife destroying her husband's world. I was halfway through a quiet Tuesday meal, nothing special, just grilled chicken and vegetables, the kind of simple dinner I'd prepared countless times before, when she launched into a speech that felt rehearsed, almost scripted. Every word seemed measured, every pause deliberate. I'd seasoned the chicken the way she liked it, with rosemary and garlic. I'd even made her favorite roasted Brussels sprouts, despite hating them myself. These small acts of love, repeated thousands of times over our years together, suddenly felt foolish and wasteful. She looked straight at me, her eyes cold in a way I'd never seen before, and repeated the phrase pathetic marriage, like it was a verdict she'd been waiting years to deliver. Not months, years. As if our entire relationship had been a mistake she'd been documenting, cataloging every perceived failure, every moment that didn't match whatever fantasy her friends had painted for her. I wondered how long she'd been collecting these grievances, storing them up like ammunition for this exact moment. Had she been critiquing our marriage during our last anniversary dinner? During our last vacation? During the quiet moments when I'd thought we were content? You'd think I'd cheated on her or ruined her life in some spectacular, unforgivable way. You'd think I'd gambled away our savings or betrayed her trust, or done something that actually warranted this level of contempt. But no, my biggest offense, the crime that had apparently destroyed our marriage, was simply being the man she'd chosen. Being Oscar. Being the person who'd loved her, supported her, built a life with her. That was my unforgivable sin. I'd been faithful, honest, hardworking, present, and somehow that wasn't enough. Or perhaps it was too much of the wrong things and not enough of whatever she'd decided she needed. Then she pulled out her phone with an almost theatrical flourish, the screen's glow illuminating her face in the dimly lit room, and opened a notes app. My heart sank as I realized this wasn't a spontaneous outburst, this was planned. She'd written it all down, organized her grievances into bullet points, prepared her case like a prosecutor ready to deliver a closing argument. She'd titled the note, The 7 Rules, with a date from 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks. She'd been planning this ambush for 3 weeks while I'd remained obliviously content, thinking we were fine. She started listing each rule her friends had supposedly given her, 7 points, like a checklist for why our relationship had been doomed from the start, as if our marriage were a failed business venture rather than a bond between two people who'd once promised to love each other through everything. I wanted to ask her which friends specifically had given her this advice, but I already knew. It was the same group she'd been spending more and more time with over the past year. Women who seemed to cycle through relationships like fashion trends, always chasing something new, something better, never satisfied with what they had. The first rule: never marry your first serious boyfriend. She paused after delivering this one, as if waiting for me to break down, to beg for forgiveness for the crime of being her first love. I didn't. I sat there, fork still in hand, and let her continue. The implication was clear. I was a mistake, a practice run, someone she should have discarded after gaining experience with other men. The fact that we'd built years together, that we'd grown from uncertain young adults into the people we'd become, none of that mattered. I was simply a checkbox in her friend's list of warnings ignored. I thought about our early days together, when we were both 22 and freshly graduated from college. The nervous excitement of our first real dates, the way we'd explored the city together, discovering new restaurants and hidden parks. The first time I'd told her I loved her, standing on a bridge at sunset like something out of a romantic movie. The first time she'd said it back, tears in her eyes, telling me she'd never felt this way about anyone. Had all of that been tainted in her mind by the fact that I was her first? Did those memories mean nothing because her friends had convinced her that first loves were disposable? The second rule hit even harder. Never commit to someone who can't instantly provide the lifestyle you want. This one stung because it revealed something I'd been too blind to see. Miranda had been measuring our relationship against some imaginary standard of wealth and luxury from day one. Never mind that we'd built our life together through hard work and careful planning. Never mind that we'd celebrated every small victory, every step forward. None of it was enough because I hadn't handed her a ready-made lifestyle of designer clothes, expensive restaurants, and luxury vacations. I was supposed to arrive fully formed, a perfect provider, never needing time to build or grow or achieve. The fact that I had a stable job, that we owned our home, that we'd never struggled to pay bills, these accomplishments meant nothing. She'd been comparing me to some fictional ideal, probably based on the heavily filtered social media lives of her friends' boyfriends and husbands. Never mind that half those couples were drowning in debt to maintain their appearances, or that their relationships were just as hollow as ours had apparently become. The image was all that mattered. The third rule made my blood run cold. Keep your own place so you always have an escape route. An escape route. She'd shared our home, our bed, our life, all while maintaining a mental exit strategy. Every moment of apparent contentment, every I love you, every shared dream, all of it had been provisional, conditional, ready to be abandoned the moment something better came along. I thought we were building a foundation together. She'd been keeping one foot out the door the entire time. I remembered when we'd first moved in together, 5 years ago. We'd been so excited, spending weekends at furniture stores, debating between different couch options, painting the walls together. I'd thought we were creating a home, a permanent space that was ours. She'd been creating a temporary stop on her journey to somewhere else. Every piece of furniture we'd chosen, every decoration we'd hung, I'd seen them as building blocks of our future. She'd seen them as easily replaceable props in a life she was always planning to leave behind. The fourth rule was almost laughable in its hypocrisy. Don't act like a traditional wife unless he can act like a traditional provider. This coming from someone who'd insisted we were equals, who'd championed modern relationships and shared responsibilities. Apparently, equality only counted when it benefited her. She wanted the freedom and independence of a modern partnership, but expected the financial security of a 1950s housewife, a perfect arrangement where she contributed nothing but expected everything. I thought about all the conversations we'd had about equality in our relationship, how we'd agreed to split household chores fairly, how we'd both committed to our careers, how we'd promised to support each other's ambitions. But now I realized that her version of equality was deeply skewed. When I cooked dinner, it was my responsibility. When she cooked dinner, it was a favor she was doing me. When I cleaned the house, it was expected. When she cleaned, it deserved praise and gratitude. The scorekeeping had always been tilted in her favor, and I'd been too invested in keeping the peace to call it out. The fifth rule revealed the real problem: travel, date around, gain experience before settling. Translation: she'd convinced herself she'd missed out on something, that there was some magical life experience that could only come from sleeping with multiple people and bouncing from relationship to relationship. The stability we'd built, the deep connection that comes from truly knowing someone, these were worthless compared to the superficial excitement of new romantic conquests. Her friends had poisoned her with the idea that commitment meant sacrifice rather than choosing something valuable. They'd sold her a fantasy where happiness came from variety rather than depth, where the thrill of new relationships somehow outweighed the comfort and intimacy of a long-term partnership. She'd bought into this mythology completely, convinced that somewhere out there was a life more exciting, more fulfilling, more worthy than the one we'd built together. The grass was always greener, and she'd become obsessed with every other lawn except our own. I wondered what experiences she thought she'd missed. Awkward first dates with strangers? The anxiety of wondering if someone would call back? The disappointment of discovering that chemistry fades and most relationships end? She'd romanticized the single life without understanding that most of her friends' adventures were carefully curated stories that hid the loneliness, the disappointment, the endless cycle of brief connections that never deepened into anything real. The sixth rule was purely mercenary. Never split expenses equally if you're not earning equally. This one exposed the transactional nature of how she'd begun viewing our marriage. Love, partnership, building a life together, these had been replaced by a cold calculation of financial inputs and outputs. Never mind that relationships aren't business deals, that partners support each other through different seasons of life, that marriage means being a team regardless of who's earning more at any given moment. She wanted a benefactor, not a husband. The irony was that we'd always split things fairly based on our incomes. When she'd been between jobs 2 years ago, I'd covered more expenses without complaint. When she'd wanted to take a lower-paying position that made her happier, I'd supported that decision and adjusted our budget accordingly. But none of that mattered now. She'd rewritten our history to paint herself as the victim, the one who'd been giving more than she received, when the truth was exactly the opposite. And the seventh, the one that explained everything, the one that made all her recent behavior suddenly, horrifyingly clear, always have a backup plan. Never close off better options. That one hit like a hammer to the chest, driving the air from my lungs and leaving me momentarily speechless. Suddenly, the late nights out with friends made sense. The secrecy around her phone, the way she'd angle the screen away when I walked into the room, the new password she'd added without explanation. The sudden urge to look her best for other people, the new clothes and makeup, the extra hours spent getting ready before going out without me. The gym membership she'd suddenly insisted on, the new hairstyle, the attention to fashion that had never mattered to her before. It all clicked into place like pieces of a puzzle I'd been too trusting to see. Every sign had been there, screaming at me, but I'd chosen to believe in us rather than doubt her. She hadn't been building a marriage. She'd been waiting for an upgrade, shopping for my replacement while pretending everything was fine. Every moment she'd spent with me had been conditional, temporary, subject to cancellation the moment someone better appeared. I wasn't her husband. I was a placeholder, someone to provide stability and companionship while she kept her options open for whatever she imagined might be out there. I was the safe choice, the backup plan, the person she settled for while continuing to search for her imaginary ideal. I thought about all the times over the past 6 months when she'd come home late, claiming work drinks or girls' nights out. The times she'd been glued to her phone, smiling at messages she wouldn't share. The weekend she'd gone on a solo trip to clear her head, coming back refreshed and distant. Had she been dating? Testing other waters? Seeing if someone else could provide the lifestyle or excitement she thought she deserved? The thought made me physically ill. When she finally finished delivering her prepared speech, she crossed her arms and waited, expecting me to beg, to defend myself, to crumble under the weight of her accusations. I could see it in her eyes, that anticipation of my breakdown. She wanted me to plead for another chance, to promise to change, to somehow transform myself into whatever impossible standard her friends had set. She'd scripted this entire scene in her mind, planned for my desperate reaction, prepared her responses to my inevitable begging. She probably expected tears. Maybe she thought I'd get angry, raise my voice, give her ammunition to paint me as the bad guy to her friends. Or perhaps she anticipated that I'd immediately offer to fix everything, promise a bigger house, expensive vacations, a complete transformation of our lifestyle. She'd probably played out a dozen scenarios in her head, each one ending with her in control, me groveling, and her deciding whether to graciously accept my pleas or dramatically walk away. Instead, I simply asked, with a calmness that surprised even me, "So what do you want to do about it?" That question threw her off completely. Her arms slowly uncrossed, her confident posture faltered. The script she'd written didn't include this response. She'd expected anger or tears, not calm clarity. She'd wanted a fight, drama, emotion, anything but this measured response. I watched confusion flash across her face, then something that might have been panic. And in that moment of uncertainty, the truth slipped out. I don't know. I just needed you to understand. Understand what? I interrupted, still calm. That our marriage is pathetic? That I'm not good enough? That you've been keeping your options open? I understand perfectly, Miranda. The question is, what do you want to do about it? She stammered, unable to form a coherent response. She hadn't thought that far ahead. She'd prepared her indictment, organized her grievances, practiced her delivery, but she'd never actually considered what came next. She just wanted me to feel as inadequate as she felt, to hurt the way she'd convinced herself she'd been hurt by choosing me. This wasn't about solving problems or improving our marriage. This was about making me suffer. She started, then stopped. I want you to try harder, to be better, to give me the life I deserve. And there it was, the truth behind all 7 rules. She wanted me to change into someone else entirely while she remained blameless, the victim of my inadequacy rather than the architect of our marriage's destruction. By the next morning, after a sleepless night spent staring at the ceiling and finally seeing my marriage for what it had become, everything was crystal clear. I'd lain there in the darkness, listening to Miranda's peaceful breathing beside me. How could she sleep so soundly after destroying everything? And made my decision. If Miranda wanted independence, space, escape routes, if those were the things she valued more than our relationship, then she could have them. All of them. Completely, and without reservation. I got up before dawn and went to my home office. I pulled up all our financial accounts, every shared expense, every joint decision we'd made about money. I started making lists, calculations, spreadsheets. I documented everything with the thoroughness of someone preparing for litigation, because in a way, I was building a case not for a court, but for my own peace of mind, proof that I'd been fair, reasonable, and more than generous. I closed our joint accounts, the ones we'd opened together years ago with such optimism and trust. Every shared dollar, every combined resource, separated. I moved my income to my own account, established new banking relationships, and ensured that my financial life was completely independent. I canceled her authorization on my credit cards, the ones she'd been using freely to fund her new wardrobe and mysterious nights out. Each click of the mouse felt like cutting a thread that had bound us together, painful but necessary. I calculated what her actual share of the bills cost: rent, utilities, groceries, insurance. Everything we'd been splitting unevenly in her favor for years while she'd been complaining about inequality. The numbers were revealing. I'd been paying nearly 70% of our expenses despite us having similar incomes. The difference had gone toward her shopping, her nights out, her self-care expenses that had steadily increased over the past year. I organized it all into a folder, meticulously documented and completely fair, labeled Independence Plan. Every expense itemized, every responsibility clearly defined, every expectation made explicit. I included copies of bills, payment histories, a proposed budget showing exactly what our 50% share would cost. I even included a timeline for transitioning to separate finances and a suggestion that we might want to start looking for separate living arrangements. She wanted the freedom to keep her options open. She could have it, along with the financial responsibility that came with actual independence. When she finally woke up that morning, shuffling into the kitchen expecting the same routine we'd had for years, I was already dressed and sitting at the table with my coffee. The folder sat in front of me, crisp and official looking. I slid it across the table as she reached for the coffee pot and told her, in the same calm voice I'd used the night before, that she now had exactly what she said she wanted. Complete independence. No shared accounts, no financial entanglement, no safety net. She could pay her half of everything, maintain her own lifestyle, and keep all her options as open as she desired. Her face went pale as she opened the folder and began reading. I watched the realization dawn as she calculated the numbers, as she understood for perhaps the first time what her actual life cost when I wasn't subsidizing it. The confidence from the previous night evaporated, replaced by something that looked like panic. Her hands trembled slightly as she flipped through the pages. "Oscar, this is—" "I didn't mean—" She started, but I interrupted. "You meant every word," I said quietly. "You've been planning this, thinking about this, discussing it with your friends. This is what you want. So now you have it. Your independence. Your escape route. Your backup plan. Consider the door officially open. But this is too much." I can't afford. You can't afford independence? I asked. Then maybe you should have thought about that before declaring our marriage pathetic. Maybe you should have considered the actual cost of the lifestyle you think you deserve before deciding I wasn't providing it. These numbers are fair, Miranda. It's exactly half of everything. True equality, just like your friend's rules suggest. She stared at the numbers, and I could see her mind working, trying to figure out how to backtrack without admitting she'd been wrong. Can we at least talk about this? Maybe we could. Talk, I said. Like we talked last night? No, Miranda. You said your piece. You delivered your verdict. Now I'm delivering mine. You have until the end of the month to decide if you want to continue living here under these terms, or if you'd prefer to make other arrangements. Either way, the joint accounts are closed. The credit cards are canceled. Your independence starts today. Within weeks, reality hit her harder than anything I could have said. The lifestyle she'd taken for granted, the comfortable home, the financial security, the freedom to spend without worry, all of it evaporated when she had to actually pay her share. I watched it happen with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. This was the woman I'd loved, the person I'd built a life with, and now I was watching her world crumble because she'd taken it all for granted. Her friends, the ones who'd filled her head with their 7 rules and convinced her our marriage was pathetic, vanished the moment she needed real support. Suddenly they were all too busy to meet up, too occupied with their own lives to answer her calls. The advice givers disappeared when their advice led to consequences. I'd hear her on the phone sometimes, trying to reach out, her voice getting smaller and more desperate with each unreturned message. The same friends who'd been available for countless girls' nights and shopping trips, who'd had endless time to fill her head with their rules and expectations, were nowhere to be found when she actually needed support. They'd been happy to help her dismantle her marriage, but they had no interest in dealing with the aftermath. Her money, the amount she actually earned versus the amount she actually spent, created a gap she couldn't bridge. She couldn't afford the life she thought she deserved, not without me footing the bill for her delusions. I saw her credit card bills piling up. She'd left one on the counter by accident, and the minimum payment alone was more than her monthly share of groceries. The new clothes stopped appearing. The salon appointments became less frequent. The nails she'd kept professionally manicured started to chip and fade. The nights out became rare, then stopped altogether. I'd see her scrolling through social media, looking at pictures of her friends at restaurants and clubs she could no longer afford to join. The FOMO that had driven so much of her dissatisfaction was now compounded by actual exclusion. She'd priced herself out of the lifestyle she'd been so desperate to maintain. The confidence she displayed while delivering her prepared speech faded as she realized what she'd actually had, and what she'd thrown away. I'd see her looking around our home with different eyes, calculating the value of what we'd built together. The realization was written all over her face. She'd had it good, better than she'd admitted, better than her friends had led her to believe. She started trying to economize in small ways that would have been laughable if they weren't so sad. Generic brands instead of name brands at the grocery store. Skipping her morning coffee shop run. Turning off lights obsessively to save on the electric bill. Each small sacrifice was a reminder that the life she'd enjoyed had been partially funded by my generosity, not her own earning power. One evening, about a month into our new arrangement, I came home to find her crying at the kitchen table, surrounded by bills and bank statements. She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes, and for a moment, I almost softened. Almost. "I can't do this," she whispered. "The numbers don't work. I can't afford to live like this." "Then you have choices to make," I replied, setting down my briefcase. "You can find a cheaper place to live. You can get a second job. You can adjust your lifestyle. These are the same choices everyone faces, Miranda. Welcome to actual independence." One night, about 6 weeks after I'd implemented the independence plan, Miranda stood in the kitchen watching me cook dinner. Just for myself now, no longer preparing meals for 2. The domesticity we'd once shared had become hollow, mechanical. We existed in the same space but lived entirely separate lives, like roommates who'd once been intimate but now barely acknowledged each other's presence. She stood there in silence for several minutes, and I could feel the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air between us. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she admitted what I already knew. I didn't want independence. I wanted comfort. I kept cooking, didn't turn around, didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing whatever expression was on my face. "I want to come home to someone who cares," she continued, her voice breaking slightly. "I want it with you. I want us back, Oscar. I made a mistake. My friends, they don't understand what we had, what we could still have. But I'd heard enough empty words to last a lifetime. I set down the spatula, finally turned to face her, and saw something I'd never seen before in her eyes, genuine fear. Not of being alone, but of losing something she'd only just realized was valuable. You wanted comfort, I repeated slowly, making sure every word landed. Not me. You wanted someone to pay your bills, to provide the lifestyle your friends convinced you that you deserved, to be your safety net while you kept looking for something better. That's not the same as wanting me, Miranda. That's not even close. She started to protest, to explain, to make excuses, but I held up my hand. And regret, I continued, regret isn't the same as love. You regret the consequences of your choices. You regret losing the comfortable life I provided. But you don't regret how you made me feel. You don't regret treating our marriage like it was disposable. You don't regret keeping one foot out the door our entire relationship. Tears started falling down her face, but they felt manipulative rather than genuine. One more tool in her arsenal, one more way to try to get what she wanted. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry, Oscar. I'll do anything. We can go to counseling. We can start over. I'll delete my friends' numbers. I'll prove to you that I've changed. You want to take everything back, I said, my voice steady despite the years of hurt finally surfacing. You want to rewind time, to unsay those words, to undo that dinner. But some words don't return once they're spoken, Miranda. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed. She wanted to come home to someone who cared, but she'd destroyed the home we'd built and trampled on the care I'd offered freely for years. She wanted comfort and security, but only after discovering that independence was harder and lonelier than she'd imagined. She wanted me back, but only because her backup plans had fallen through and her friends' promises had proven empty. The woman standing in my kitchen wasn't the person I'd married, or maybe she was exactly that person, and I'd simply been too in love to see it clearly. Either way, the marriage she'd called pathetic was dead, killed not by my inadequacy, but by her inability to value what she had until it was gone. Some words, once spoken, change everything, and some changes can never be undone. This is the truth I carry with me now, months after that fateful dinner, as I build a new life from the ruins of what I thought was a solid marriage. Miranda eventually moved out, unable to afford her half of our home, and unwilling to continue living in the uncomfortable silence that had settled between us. She found a small apartment across town, a studio that cost her nearly all of her paycheck. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd reconnected with her friends, though the relationships were strained. They didn't like being proven wrong, didn't appreciate having their advice lead to such tangible consequences. I kept the house, kept the life we'd built, but it felt different now. Emptier but also cleaner, like a wound that's finally been properly cleaned even though the process was painful. I removed the photos from the walls, the ones that showed us smiling and hopeful. I repainted the dining room, covering the warm beige Miranda had chosen with a cool gray that felt more honest. Sometimes I wonder if there was a moment when things could have been different, when I could have fought harder or loved better. But then I remember her phone screen glowing in the darkened room, her carefully prepared list of grievances, her admission that she'd been keeping her options open. And I realized that fighting for someone who's already looking for the exit is just another form of losing. The truth is that Miranda didn't just wake up one day and decide our marriage was pathetic. She'd been building that conclusion for months, maybe years, influenced by friends who valued excitement over stability, novelty over depth, the fantasy of something better over the reality of something good. She'd been comparing our real life to others' carefully curated social media posts, measuring our genuine partnership against fictional ideals, and finding us wanting not because we actually were, but because she'd been taught to expect perfection instead of appreciating what we had. I've learned that some people are constitutionally unable to be satisfied. They'll always see the grass as greener elsewhere, always imagine that happiness is just one more relationship, one more lifestyle change, one more fresh start away. I've also learned that love, real love, requires more than just feeling. It requires commitment, appreciation, and the willingness to choose your partner even when things aren't perfect. Miranda wanted the feeling without the work, the comfort without the commitment, the benefits without the appreciation. She wanted to be loved without having to love back in the ways that matter. Miranda taught me a valuable lesson, though not the one she intended, that being alone is infinitely better than being with someone who makes you feel alone. That independence is only valuable when it's chosen, not when it's thrust upon you as punishment for not being enough. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone go, even if they're begging to stay, because their regret isn't the same as readiness to change. The marriage she called pathetic is over. And honestly, that's the best thing that could have happened to both of us. Thank you for watching the video to the end. YouTube may no longer suggest my channel to you, so subscribe to it to receive new interesting stories. You will also help the channel grow and improve the quality of its content. A playlist with other interesting stories that you can listen to is now displayed on the screen. You can also write in the comments what stories you would like to see on the channel.